All right, so we start in the courts. Jacob Zuma's arms deal corruption trial has been postponed until the 26th of October in the KwaZulu-Natal High Court. Judge Piet Koen is then expected to deliver his judgment on the former president's special application to remove Billy Downer as state prosecutor in his case. Zuma's advocate Dali Mpofu accused Downer of misconduct and the National Prosecuting Authority of political meddling in his prosecution. He said the application should be seen in a wider context, which includes the prosecutor's conduct, together with his qualification and appointment. The state, led by advocate Wim Trengove, said Zuma was raising old complaints, which the courts have already dealt with. Zuma also accuses Downer of recently leaking confidential information about his health to a journalist. The state denies the claim, saying the documents were filed in court and therefore were in the public domain. However, Mpofu indicated that Zuma was considering further legal action in the matter. All right, so let's examine this more closely. The Pietermaritzburg High Court reserving judgment on former President Jacob Zuma's special plea, it's called. The judge said he needed several weeks to make a proper judgment, and he's postponed the case until the end of October. Of course, Zuma wants the prosecutor Downer removed from his arms deal corruption case, saying he is biased. But the state's lawyer has accused Zuma's legal team of not only espousing old arguments and conspiracy theories as well, whilst providing little evidence. To discuss, we're joined by attorney and legal analyst Benedict Phiri. Mr. Phiri, thank you for being with us. So, Dali Mpofu, Jacob Zuma's lawyer, has argued that Billy Downer should be removed. One of the arguments is that he was not dispassionate about the case. The other side says it's not a sin for a prosecutor to want to win. So this has all raised the question as to whether prosecutors are allowed to be emotional about their work. What do you think of the arguments presented by both sides?
So thank you so much, Francis. I think, Advocate Mpofu on behalf of Mr. Zuma really building a case against Billy Downer. The question really is to what extent is Billy Downer's conduct an impediment of the National Prosecuting Authority continuing with this criminal trial in respect of the former president? That's really the crisp question before the court. And what we know, and you would have heard Advocate Wim Trengove refer to this case as well, is there's a case called the Porritt case, which effectively distills a legal principle that, bias in of itself in respect of one prosecutor, or we can call it prosecutorial misconduct, whichever way you want to call it, does not necessarily taint the entire prosecution. So, when we look at the relief that the former president is seeking, which is essentially to say, well, there is bias and therefore you may have to acquit me, or rather you have to acquit me if there's bias, I don't think he's done enough, because he only focuses on Billy Downer, but doesn't really speak to the NPA as a whole. And in fact, the allegations that the state are saying that, scant on evidence, a rehashing of old allegations, that speaks to the fact that his facts on that particular aspect around whether the NPA as a whole can be tainted in respect of Mr. Downer's conduct is not strong enough. Yeah. So I don't think they've done enough in this particular instance to stop this prosecution and have Mr. Zuma acquitted.
Yeah, and you say there is this precedent, there is this case that the state then can draw on. The state, meanwhile, has said that Billy Downer's conduct has been exemplary. Wim Trengove, the advocate yesterday, saying he actually deserves a medal. Do you think they've successfully, they've certainly tried to put down all the arguments presented by the former president's legal team?
And therein lies part of the problem for Mr. Zuma, is we have a matter which is being decided on the papers. There's no oral evidence that is being called at this stage. Well, we don't know what Judge Piet Koen will do, but it seems like he's ready and willing to actually decide the matter without calling any oral evidence, which means that, the state's version, or rather Billy Downer's version, if not firmly refuted, will stay. And, so that becomes a bit of a problem for Mr. Zuma because a lot of his allegations were conjecture. Granted, there are strong allegations around the leaking of medical information recently, the discussions with Sam Sol, etc. But the rest of the allegations, conjecture, have been dealt with by previous courts. Not enough to really tilt the balance in favor of Mr. Zuma.
Well, let's end there with the leaking of information because that has been argued by both sides. The state says Billy Downer was just attaching something from correctional services. It didn't have all the details of Zuma's health. It was a very general thing that he attached to an affidavit. What do you think about those arguments? Because Dali Mpofu and the former president's legal team are trying to paint Billy Downer as guilty of criminal misconduct here.
Yes. So Advocate Mpofu referred to a section of the NPA Act which precludes anybody in the employ of the NPA from disclosing any information in the course of their employment. In this case, Billy Downer, in the course of his employment as the state prosecutor, and saying that attached to that are criminal consequences. And the importance there is that the disclosure by Billy Downer to a journalist was before the matter, the document had actually became a court document. So it was still not yet in the public domain, and therefore that disclosure was a little bit preemptive. And before the time it could have been made. Over and above that, what he thought was egregious, Advocate Mpofu, was the fact that there were actually directions to this journalist as to when to publish this matter. And obviously Advocate Mpofu saying this really hits home at the ability of Billy Downer to prosecute with independence and impartiality, Mr. Zuma.
All right, we'll see what the judge says there. Finally, Zuma also wants a second inquiry into whether he should be acquitted, which would mean that the legal costs around his personal cases get even bigger. Do you think there's any prospect of something like that?
I personally do not believe there's a prospect. The judge is faced with the decision of making the decision based on the affidavits that have been submitted together with the arguments that we've now had the benefit of hearing over the last 2 days. I don't think President Zuma has laid enough of a basis for the matter to be tried in an open way, because the only facts really that he leads that support his assertion around trying this case are conjecture and what has happened in the past and rehashing. So I think the judge is going to be alive to that and will probably say we shouldn't go down that path.
All right, thank you very much, attorney and legal analyst Benedict Phiri. And we will only hear what the judge says towards the end of October. He says he needs time to make a proper judgment around this issue.